Welcome to the Creative Community Podcast presented by Destination Arete. I'm David.
And I'm Mark. We're building a community of creatives who work together to achieve creative excellence. Today's guest is design fabricator Scot Crabtree.
Scott talks about the unique problem-solving challenges that face three-dimensional sign makers and shares his unique and personal philosophy of creativity.
Scott also shares his top sign makers to follow on social media. Without further ado, here's our interview with design fabricator Scot Crabtree.
Well, my name is Scot Crabtree. I'm a graphic designer in New Albany, Ohio. And the best way to describe what I do is to say that I turn a digital product into a physical product. And all the steps involved in kind of that translation there can be definitely tricky to find the workarounds. But once you nail down those skills, you're pretty invaluable in the industry.
Yeah, is there something you've made recently or something you've got sitting around that you might be able to like show us?
Yes. Let me go grab that real quick.
No problem.
So,
Man, that is a great shot.
Yeah.
It's 30 by 12 foot shed.
Sorry, audio listeners. Get on YouTube.
Get on YouTube. Check Scott.
Having the equipment necessary to turn a digital product into a physical product is no small thing to balk at. There's a wide variety of price ranges, but you don't need to go crazy to get your feet wet and to get started into this kind of work. I recently went to a workshop at what I consider to be one of the best sign shops in the US called Synergy Signs in Strasburg, Ohio. And it's basically run and operated by this one guy there who does the finishing and the CNC work on these signs that are absolutely gorgeous, on par with sculpture work. So having the chance to be there, I learned so much about the different finishing techniques and all that. I know this is audio, but I can show you guys. This here, this was cut off of a CNC machine. One piece, it's not multiple pieces put together.
Oh, wow.
And then we learned the finishing techniques for doing this kind of stuff, some special paint brands, and all these kinds of new techniques. Got metallic paints.
Nice.
Again, all flat, all CNC work. And then one series I recently started on YouTube and Instagram, I'm calling it the Lorem Ipsum series. And if you've done anything with text or graphic design, you know the first line of any random generated text is going to start with Lorem Ipsum. There's a whole history behind the phrase used in the Lorem Ipsum text, but it felt a fitting title for this series I'm starting, which is focused around new formats of dimensional typography that are beyond what you would typically see out in the world. So this one here is what I've been posting on Instagram for a while. This is actually a finished piece. I just haven't mounted it onto the background yet. But having the equipment to do this kind of thing and learning about the different techniques needed to get the sandstone finish, it's been a trip. It's been a long project, but I've really enjoyed it.
That is so cool. If you're not watching this episode, definitely go check it out on YouTube and just see these pieces that Scott's sharing. So you talked about signs a little bit, right? And that's how I know you, just casually, as the guy who makes signs. But what is it about signs or three-dimensional, I guess signage and branding that made you say, I want to do that?
Well, to be completely honest, it was never about signs in the beginning at all. What really got me down this path was my draw and my desire for creative problem solving. So the way I've been able to describe it to people is like this. In the center here, you have creative problem solving. Over here, you have engineering, you have just general contractors, you have graphic designers, you have all sorts of avenues that you can take this skill and apply it in so many different areas of life and different careers. So if you can understand that one aspect and the value of creative problem solving, your world opens up tremendously.
That's awesome.
Wow. Yeah, that is fantastic. So like when along your journey did you make that leap from creative problem solving to choosing? Because I mean, obviously with your skill set, you could have been like an engineer or you could have been a graphic designer. When did you make that leap to that specific finger of the design process?
Whenever I was deciding what I wanted to go to college for, I initially did want to look into engineering, but I quickly learned
Okay.
that's not the way my brain works. Quickly learned. I'd always been more creative. I have, at least what I consider, a very good imagination, and I can visualize 3D things in my head pretty well, and it's helped me a lot in this kind of work that I do. And once I was able to sort of narrow down in the creative aspect of, you know, the available careers out there, graphic design seemed like a no-brainer. Whenever I started learning more about graphic design and all the work that's involved there, I initially saw artists and graphic designers kind of together. But the more I learned and the more I saw the value of the two different fields, I realized that they both have a big distinction. I think it was Oscar Wilde, correct me if I'm wrong. I think he is quoted as saying, "Art is useless." And at first, I was kind of taken aback that somebody like that would say that kind of quote. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the point he was making. In graphic design, that's the career, the avenue more focused on the problem solving, and the artistry is more around the aesthetics. There's a lot of different ways you can approach that, break that statement down. But in a very, very general sense, I feel like that's an accurate way to kind of differentiate the two between graphic design and artists. But those two fields do come together. So the creative problem solving is what I saw as more of the draw towards graphic design rather than artistry as like a fine artist.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what pushed me down that avenue. And me being the type to always want to work with my hands, even as a little kid, I quickly realized that the digital side of graphic design, doing websites and posters and business cards, that really wasn't what I was mainly drawn to. What I enjoyed was taking those designs, the creative problem solving, the artistry of making those solutions look appealing, and taking those skills and putting them into the physical medium of signage. So that is really what introduced me into signage, making things with problem solving and using the artistry to make those solutions look good.
That's pretty cool. I have a question for you. Something you said about you've always had a big imagination. Are you a reader, or what? Do you like to read? Like, what is it, do you think, that kind of like sparks that imagination, or do you think you were just born with it?
There's this common misconception that in order to be creative, you have to be born with creativity. And I got to tell you, that is the wrong way to look at it.
Okay.
Everybody has some form of creativity inside them. That does not mean they know how to draw something beyond a stick figure. Creativity can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And for me personally, being the way my mind works, if I'm sitting down reading a book, unless it's a really good book that I'm really interested in, I'm going to get distracted pretty quickly. I'm going to lose my place, have to restart the page. I'm sure a lot of you can relate. So I had to find creative sources elsewhere. And one of the biggest sources of inspiration for me is honestly just getting out in the world and seeing how other designers have solved their own creative problems. One of the greatest places you can go with the highest concentration of those creative problem solutions is the supermarket. Just go down the aisles, look at the packaging.
Nice.
Take a look at how the artwork had to be worked around corners, folds, material limitations. Understanding that and breaking down what you're seeing in everyday life is invaluable. And you can take those little snippets of information, stick them in your pocket, and pull them out whenever you need them later on.
That is nuts. That now I literally want to go to the grocery store right now. And literally when you said like the highest concentration of that, I literally thought you were going to say art school. Like a lot of the creative people. You're like, no, like go where the professionals are, right? Because their products are actually out in the world. That's such good advice, man.
I do want to make a distinction there though, because you did mention go where the professionals are. There's definitely a value to that. But this is something I've been realizing recently as I've been trying to find new sources of inspiration online. Go to where the students are. Go to the places where people have no idea what they can't do, because people
Oh,
are trying to do things that you can't do. And in doing so, there's a new idea that somebody never thought of. It's the same thing if you're watching a sci-fi movie. So many practical scientific advancements have roots in science fiction. Those artists made things that could not possibly exist. And then engineers and scientists saw that, realized its usefulness, and then tried to work the problem and find the best way to make it happen.
wow. Wow, that is crazy. That is such a great insight, and thank you so much for drawing that distinction. I think we're going to move on to our next question because it kind of has to do with art schools, artists, that kind of thing. So, sign making and manufacturing is not a very publicized or I guess publicly celebrated endeavor. So, what do you say, Scott, to the kid out there who wants to do this when no one else wants to? Like, where were you able to find community with other fabrication artists? Like, what was that journey like for you?
There are a lot of different ways you can approach that. There's a great making community online. There are so many different people who make things and post them online and share what they've learned with people online. And so many of them are open and available for you to ask questions for any problems that you may come across. But don't feel like you have to have the multi-million-dollar CNC machine to get started. Whenever I was in school, I was literally using paper and foam core to make signs that I would have otherwise used HDU, which is a super expensive machinable foam that costs like $200, $300 a sheet. Don't let your limitations stop you. Take what you have around you and find a way to change it into what you need and to use that to make what you want.
That's pretty cool. Would you say that, because I'm trying to think of how to word this, signs were a big deal before screens existed, right? And nowadays, the menu board is a TV. And that you can still sometimes find menu boards where they're molded or they've got a nice wood frame, or but even now the signs on the road are TVs or screens. So I don't want to ask you if you think it's a dying art, but like what's the attitude in the community? Like, is there like this fear, or is there more just like a craftsmanship is still like valuable? I don't know. What's the vibe?
There are certain people who think that traditional signage is a dying art, and the skills involved are definitely less common, be it hand lettering. There's a huge community out there just for hand letters. I am not that good with hand lettering. For me, if I need to do some typography in that way, I would probably rely on vinyl. Now, you can look at that as if the hand lettering is a dying art, but another way you can look at it is as if the field has changed, it's adapted, it's upgraded. So you can also look at it in the sense that it's growing, it's improving. You just have to understand and work with the dynamic nature of any sort of manufacturing field, because as the technology develops, your production rates are going to speed up. Your skills needed to be able to complete a job are going to change. And you have to be able to be willing to change in order to stay with the times. So the involving of screens and stuff like that, that's not necessarily replacing all signage, all forms of old traditional signage. If you go to a place like Gatlinburg, Tennessee, or Disney World, they're still pretty much exclusively the really cool sculpture-esque signage out there in the places like that. And I've been to the places, I've talked to the people who make those signs, and it's crazy. The amount of respect I have for them is very high, because they have to change, they have to keep updated with the industry. But signage, the art of signage isn't dying. I guarantee you, anyone watching or listening, take a look around where you're at, be it outside or inside. If you're driving your car, look on the side of the road, I can almost guarantee you're going to find a sign within 10 paces. If you look around a corner, you'll see something on the side of the building. You look outside your classroom, there's going to be some wayfinding signage, which is a whole other category of signage. It's everywhere. It can't go away because people need to know what's around them. They need to understand the spaces that they're in. And signage is the way that we have solved that problem.
Man, can we quote you saying signage is the way we understand spaces? That's like the coolest. It's like the coolest thing I've ever heard.
That is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, you don't notice the signage until it's not there.
Wow. Yeah.
Good signage is signage you never have to look for, basically.
Yeah. I this is just an anecdote, but I got to work in interiors for 1 week, which interiors is the place that handles all the signage at the college that I'm at. And I got to watch the engraver work, like the machine that they had for the engraving. And it was so cool. Like there were so many scraps and stuff. And I was really thinking about you, Scott. I was like, first of all, Scott would be like, this is Bush League. Like, this is nothing, like like there's so much more that could be done. But I was like, he would just be loving this place because I could just literally breathe in the smell of everything. And it was such a tactile environment. And like, it was so tactile. Like everything in the shop was just very, like, it was meant to feel a certain way and look a certain way. And then I've never looked at signs around campus the same again because I know how they were manufactured.
Absolutely. I mean, once you've seen that world, you can't not see it. You can't unsee it.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So how does sign making broaden your creative community, or like how have you been able to use that to, do you have to go out and meet them, or does it kind of, you start to bump into them as you go along? Like what's that process look like for you?
The creative community around signage is pretty broad because the definition of signage itself is pretty broad. I mean, literally a printed black and white piece of paper on the front door of a store, that's signage. Also, the huge Jumbotron at the football stadium, that's signage. It's such a broad category where there's a lot of camaraderie. You can find people who are wanting to improve. You can find a guy with a CNC machine in his garage making little wooden family signs, or you can meet a guy who's learning to weld to make big monument signs you're going to see out in front of a strip mall. There's so many different ways you can approach signage. There's so many different things that you can learn that you're going to meet a lot of individuals who have learned small parts to huge sweeping categories of the industry.
So besides yourself, and I highly recommend that people follow you, but like, who are your top 3 follows for like, if you want to follow sign makers on Instagram, like who are your top 3, like, oh, you got to follow blank?
If we're looking for sign makers specifically, then there's going to be, in the US, I'd say Synergy Signs, like I mentioned earlier. They do phenomenal work, award-winning sculptural signage. Another great company that's on par with Synergy Signs is called the Imagination Corporation. They're up in Canada. This guy, his name is Dan Swayze. His work is phenomenal. He's working on a hotel right now, and they're doing all sculptural molded concrete. And they have this monument sign out in front with this gorgeous tree and this foam brickwork. If you see that hotel, you will understand where a wide understanding of signage can take you and the different ways you can use it.
Yeah, we'll try to put links to them in our descriptions, and that way, our listeners can check that out. And speaking of links in the description, Scott has a great YouTube channel, and I'll let him plug that in a minute. But I watched your video about your Tennessee Theater sign, and I want to know how much math is involved in what you do, because you can't just look at a massive, marquee sign on the side of the road and then go home and make it small. Like, you can't just be like, I'll just make it smaller. Like, you got to know how to make it smaller. So how much math do you do? And like, how much math did you think you were going to do when you started this? Or is it just kind of been like, as you've gone along, you've learned like what you need to do to get things down to scale?
My biggest recommendation to anybody wanting to start a project like that is to don't feel like you have to have all the answers before you start.
Nice.
I wanted to do this project for one of my senior portfolio projects. That was 2 years before I actually started on the project itself, because I couldn't figure out how to do it. There were so many different problems that I had to find a solution for. And I was just crunching the numbers in the back of my head. I would always have it in my sketchbook. Every once in a while, I'd go open it, look at it, sort of refresh my brain, take a creative, fresh look at it. But the biggest hang up for that sign was all of those darn light bulbs. There are over, I don't even remember how many tens of thousands of light bulbs there are in the original sign. But I had to find a way to replicate that on a much smaller scale. Another troublesome thing is those classic old signs like that. They were made out of sheet metal and bent sheet metal, which is very, very thin. And for me to properly scale down the sign, I mean, those walls would have been less than a millimeter, which is not practical. So I had to find a way to change it without changing it. Finding a solution that didn't depart from the original artwork, if you will. So I had to take what I know about different materials, how far I could push them, how thin I could make it before it would fail, and apply that knowledge to making walls that would allow me to still retain the same look as the original. In the end, I ended up 3D printing over 3,000 light bulbs for that sign. They're all out of transparent ABS. So obviously the LEDs, the light bulbs themselves, they're not illuminated. But I have a technical base beneath the face of the sign, and the LEDs are the bulbs, the 3D printed bulbs are on top. And in that technical base is over 25 feet of LED strip on each sign. And the light goes through the 3D printed bulbs. And that was the best solution, I thought, to still have the illuminated bulbs without making it look too weird.
It turned out great.
Yeah, it took a lot of work. It took me about 2 months to finish both of those. I made 2 copies. I mean, my thumbs literally had calluses trying to push in all those light bulbs. So it was a nightmare.
Wait, so is that 6,000 bulbs total that you pushed in?
No, that was the cumulative total.
Okay,
but
okay, so 1,500 per sign. Yeah, wow, that's insane. That's so
on many. On the YouTube video that I made in regards to me actually building the sign, there's a little time lapse in the middle of it of me pushing some of the bulbs in, and there's a window in my shop, so you can just see the sun going down at a very high rate as I'm just sitting there just pushing little light bulbs in repeatedly.
That's funny. That's hilarious. Well, tell us where people can find you. I know you've got YouTube, you got Instagram. I don't know if there's any other good places to check. Tell people about your Patreon, stuff like that.
Well, I've been using Instagram as my primary source of social media for a while now. I've got that over on Facebook as well, and they're both under Crabtree Creative. One of the benefits of the pandemic shutdown, you don't hear that phrase together very often, one of the benefits, was it gave me the opportunity to start my YouTube channel. It's under the same name, Crabtree Creative, but I've been working on putting more in-depth explanations of the projects that I do, showing people a relatively step-by-step process that also keeps it pretty interesting and engaging. And I've been really enjoying that. I've been getting a lot of positive feedback. So far, I've been up to about 330 subscribers, so we'll see if we can get that a little higher. So I'm working on it at least.
Once again, we are super grateful to Scott for joining us for the podcast this week. I personally thought that what he said about finding inspiration at the grocery store, that was like super interesting to me.
Yeah.
And it was just a big surprise that was his just like go-to place. And you can find him on Instagram at Crabtree Creative, or on his YouTube channel, also Crabtree Creative.
As always, subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube for more episodes and interviews like this one. And leave us a comment under the video or review on Apple Podcasts with your favorite part of the show. That helps the algorithm know that you enjoyed this. And speaking of the algorithm, feel free to share this interview with a friend that you think might enjoy hearing what Scott had to say.
You can connect with us on Facebook and Instagram, Destination Arete, ARETE, for more interviews like this one, as well as information about community activities and upcoming Arete projects. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another interview. See you then.